how should you communicate to that parent who seems less than convinced that their child has been at fault since the kid is denying the behavior? Um, that one can get tricky. My biggest piece of advice, which is hard for teachers because it's not like we have downtime in the middle of the day, but my biggest piece of advice would be to get on top of it, get in front of the communication if at all possible. And if that means that during your lunch break you are emailing that parent, breathing, rereading, carefully doing it calmly, but emailing that parent and just giving them a rundown of, hey, we had this issue come up today, blah, 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 and then explaining some of the details, you have high odds of being the first story told. And that can shape the response in a really impactful and powerful way. And so it is worth the sacrifice lunchtime if you have an issue like that, in my opinion, to be able to have the parent hear from you first. Because we all know that sometimes when you hear a story, even if it ends up being false, your initial emotional response to it just gets you so riled up that coming back down from that to acknowledge truth, even when it's expressed very calmly and clearly, can be a difficulty for some people. So just being first can be helpful. Um, in addition to that, and I would say this one is highly dependent upon your relationship with the parent and also whether or not they're currently antagonistic. If they are currently antagonistic towards you and tending not to believe you, but only believe their kid, I would not do this. But if it's just pretty neutral, maybe even just a touch negative, I would say that I think that there's benefit in that communication with them, really treating them as a peer in the understanding that kid versions of things are very kid biased. And so even just kind of with even with an emoji, like a winking emoji, just something to make it clear that the text is not belittling their kid, but just being an adult, kind of laughing about how kids are, something along the lines of, I wanted to reach out about XYZ and let you know that ABC happened, since we all know that sometimes a kid's version of events conveniently admits any of their responsibility with the winking smiley face, something along those lines. So a little bit tongue in cheek, a little bit playful. Again, if they're antagonistic, I would not do that at all. But if it's neutral, that can help them remember that their kid is not always honest, and keep that in mind as they're hearing from their child the kid's version of events. Um, Also, since this parent doesn't appear to necessarily believe the issues, I think it would be very, very helpful to have another adult, ideally an admin, in that conversation with you, whether it's a personal conversation or on the phone or in an email conversation that you CC them on, but having another adult there to back up what you're seeing and confirm that no, this is the truth. This is what really happened. Susie really was completely inappropriate in class. That can be a really helpful piece so that you have, again, especially if it's an admin, that admin backup to support you. Um, I think that that can help parents kind of be like, okay, it's not just a teacher picking on them. We have that support. And then this last piece in particular for people in public schools, I think can be helpful. And it doesn't have to be an acknowledgement that something is okay, which I think is really hard for some of us as Christians, but it can be an acknowledgement that it is reality. And so what comes to mind for me is kids swearing in school. We have kids who swear in school. I don't want any of my kids to swear, but I know some of their families are okay with it. And so I know that it can be a struggle for them to remember the different requirements that exist. And so just acknowledging, like, I understand that this language might be okay at home, but in the school setting, it's not allowed. And so it can help lower the defensiveness of families if they don't feel like you are attacking them and their value system. If their parenting and their value system and their lifestyle you feels under attack, it's going to be a lot harder to convince them to get on board with helping their kid do well with school expectations. And that's your current aim. Now, we can pray about the alternative. We can pray about their home life. We can ask for God to shift their expectations if you know that that is what's happening in their home, whatever it might be. But just having that humility to acknowledge, I'm talking about school. I'm not trying to run your life. Um, I think can be helpful. And again, it's a difficulty. It's hard and requires, I think, a lot of prayer and carefulness in language, but I think it's something to consider as you move forward. Again, depending on your context, whether it's Christian or public school, and depending on the relationship with the parent. So those are some of the things that come to mind for me.